You may have missed it because of the bright glow coming from Paycor Stadium in the offseason, but the Reds actually made moves this offseason, and we're going to tell you which of those moves were the best on this Aloha Friday edition of the Locked On Reds podcast. Let's go.
You are Locked On Reds, your daily Cincinnati Reds podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Reds with myself, Jeff Carr, and my co-host, Stephen Offenbaker. We are lifelong Cincinnati Reds fans that have turned an addiction to this team into information for you. I want to thank you for taking time out of your day to listen to us talk some Reds with you. We encourage you, if you're listening or if you're watching here on this live edition of the podcast, hit us up in the comments section, or if you're listening, hit us up on Twitter, and you can be part of the show because talking Reds is what we do, and we want to talk Reds with you. Locked On Reds is also part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team every day. And when it comes to today's live Aloha edition of the podcast, we've got a lot to talk about because, yes, Steve, as you mentioned, the Reds made moves. Now, I'm sure there's plenty of folks who are watching that are just like, oh, come on. They barely did anything at all. But what they did was very impactful. And both you and I have differing opinions on what the most impactful move was. So I'm feeling generous today, Steve. I'm going to let you go first.
Why, thank you, sir. No, listen, Jeff, when you go all the way back to the beginning of the offseason, you and I both identified areas that we felt like this team had major needs and they really needed to address. And that's one of the areas that I'm going to focus in on for where I feel like the Reds did the best job in the offseason. And that is the complete overhaul of the catcher's room. We still haven't named that darn thing, but the complete overhaul of the catcher's room. They got rid of the Colesberries. They got rid of the Papirskis and all of the other guys that couldn't actually catch the ball. And they went out and they brought in Luke Maile. I said it right. And Kurt Casale. They brought in both of those guys. And the reason that that's important, the reason that that really matters is because it allowed them to implement a plan with Tyler Stevenson that you and I have been advocating for all along. In case you missed it in yesterday's news, David Bell was asked how he was going to handle Tyler Stevenson in the 2023 baseball season. This comes from Charlie Goldsmith's Twitter account. David Bell said that the plan for Tyler Stevenson is to catch about 65 games this year. For those doing the math at home, that equates to about 40% of the Reds games Tyler Stevenson will be at catcher. That's 4 out of 10 days. Then 3 games within that 10-day span, they're going to use Tyler Stevenson at DH. And then 2 additional days, he's going to play first base. Basically, Jeff, they're doing what we said they should do all along. They're going to get Tyler Stevenson in this lineup 140 to 150 games as long as he remains healthy. And the Reds lineup is just that much better because of it. But none of that could have happened if they hadn't gone out and got Maile and if they hadn't gone out and got Kurt Casale. Because really, if you look at these numbers, Kurt Casale is probably going to be the primary catcher for the Reds in 2023. And I didn't think they would actually do that. And it's really what needed to be done. It needed to be somebody else catching a majority of the games. And the Reds have actually gone all in on that. And I think that's their best move of the offseason.
I 100% agree. And Charlie Goldsmith even had an article in the Inquirer talking with David Bell about this. Apparently all off season, this has been a plan of David Bell's. He pulled out a schedule during his chat with Charlie for this article, and he literally had every game marked where Tyler Stevenson is going to play. Now, of course, health has a lot to do with this. Is Kurt Casale going to be healthy and Luke Maile going to be healthy all year? Is Tyler Stevenson going to be healthy all year? This is assuming health, and obviously the plan will change accordingly. But the fact that David Bell, who I think a lot of people love to just bag on because they think that with all the platoons and all the lineup changes and stuff like that, that he doesn't know who's going to be playing day in and day out. when he said that he's coming into camp and he already has a plan as to what day and what position Tyler Stevenson will play at, that's huge. Because that's another thing we talk about, right? Like, obviously, positional flexibility is huge in most players on a team like the Reds, where we're trying to figure out where everybody's going to be the best at. But the other side of that coin is these guys are human beings. They want to know what to expect coming in to work each day. Like, can you imagine going into work each day at the hospital, not knowing exactly what department you're going to be in? There's a little bit of trepidation there. Like, I understand.
More than a little bit.
There's a human element to this. And I think that David Bell understands that. And I love that he's put that much thought into it this offseason.
Well, it's tremendous, and it allows Tyler Stevenson now to come into spring training and, do the things he does as a catcher, work with the pitching staff, get himself ready, get himself in shape to play the catcher position. But it also lets him know, hey, I need to take extra ground balls at first base. I need to be able to, cover that territory and be not a defensive liability. So I love it. It lets Tyler Stevenson now at the very beginning of spring training really prepare himself mentally, physically, to be successful in these different roles, in a different role overall than he's been asked to do thus far in his career. And kudos to David Bell for not waiting and doing that sly manager thing where they don't want to tip their hand. Who cares? Like, tell us what you're doing. I think it's great. Between Nick Krall finally learning how to talk to the media a little bit, and now we've got David Bell like telling us what's actually going to go on. I don't know how to act. This is exciting times coming out of Red spring training.
Yeah. What's going on here? And look, the best version of the lineup, and this is in no way a referendum on his ability to catch. This is in no way a referendum on, the Reds think that he is catcher 1B now and Kirk Casale is catcher 1A. This is simply getting his bat in the lineup. We talked about it multiple times this offseason that last year when the Reds had him in the lineup, they averaged over 5 runs a game. And when they had him out of the lineup, they averaged just a smidge over 4 runs a game. It's literally an entire run difference. This is huge. The other big move, and this one's for me, and I definitely agree that Tyler Stevenson, because that was I think that might have been our top goal, was to alleviate the need for him to be behind the plate every day. The other big move for me is getting rid of Moose. And I don't mean this as a slight against him as a person, but there was no place for him on this roster. The designated hitter position needs to be something that Tyler Stevenson can rotate into, Jonathan India can rotate into, Joey Votto can rotate into. It needs to be that extra
guys that can actually hit.
Yes. Moose couldn't hit. Like, when he was healthy, I think he hit a home run every 3 weeks. It was just that bad. And when he was in the field, let's not even talk about what he looked like at third base, because that was bad. And that was the pseudo sounding plan wherever the season ended last year. And you're like, this cannot be what the Reds do. And they looked at Spencer Steer and they looked at the different guys that they have now on the roster. And they said, these are the guys that need to be getting everyday playing time, not Moose. And
so are you calling this then addition by subtraction?
100%.
Is that the
100% addition by subtraction? And kudos, we don't do this very often, but kudos to Phil for just writing that check.
What?
Yeah.
No,
right.
yeah.
The
Writing
SOB
that check.
had something
Absolutely.
right. Son of Bob had something right.
No, you're Jeff, this is the thing, the simple act of cutting Moose. And I know there were guys like, well, they got to pay him anyway. He was taking up space.
Yes.
And just the act of cutting him now allows David Bell the freedom to experiment and move these pieces around. I'm telling you, this is probably going to be David Bell's favorite year of managing, because it's going to allow him to do that thing that he loves, which is tinker all the time. He's going to be able to move all these parts and slide guys around and play different positions and do all of the things he loves to do while utilizing his analytics and his spreadsheet. And all of that comes from the fact that they got Mike Moustakas out of the way.
And while they didn't do much, the Reds freeing up Tyler Stevenson from not having to be behind the plate every day, and the Reds freeing up the roster by getting rid of Moose, were super impactful moves by this Reds organization, and two things that we had high up on the checklist for how can the Reds have a good offseason. They hit that.
No, absolutely. And, they weren't huge moves. They weren't worthy of major press conferences, but they were moves that will definitely have an impact. Jeff, we really love these Aloha Friday shows, and a lot of good things have come from these shows. And one of them was a suggestion from one of the viewers to start digging in on the stats we like to use on the show and start really breaking down what we use, why we use it, and what it means, because there are still people out there, especially, if you've been around baseball a long, long time and you grew up on just the counting stats and just looking at average and on base percentage and home runs and RBIs. There's some of these stats you may not necessarily know what they mean. So coming up here in the next segment, we are going to dig into my favorite stat that I like to use as just a quick and dirty look at how a player rates against the rest of the league, and that is OPS plus. We're going to be talking about that in just a minute. But before we get into the OPS plus conversation, let's talk about the sponsor of today's podcast. I want to talk to you about FanDuel, because this podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. We are at the midway point of the NBA season, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel. It is America's #1 sportsbook. Because new customers at FanDuel are going to get a no sweat first bet. That's right. You upload your money to your account, you place that very first bet, and if you don't hit, if you miss, it doesn't matter, because FanDuel is going to reimburse you in bonus bets up to $1,000. That's $1,000 and up to $1,000 in bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. You can check out some baseball futures if you're not interested in things like the NBA right now. Baseball futures are fun to mess around with. 11-1 odds for the Reds to win at least 80 games. Jeff has yet to confirm if he's in on this or not. He's telling us they're going to win 75 games. 5 games is not that much more, Jeffrey. I know math is hard. We talk about that all the time. But 11-1 odds. I bet it is enticing you. Just
I think I'm putting a little bit on it. Yeah.
That's what I thought. If you're that optimistic like Jeff, you can go place that bet over at FanDuel.com/locked on, because you don't want to miss your chance to get a no sweat first bet of up to $1,000 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/locked on. FanDuel.com/LOCKEDON. Locked on. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And now that sports betting is legal in Ohio, Locked On has the perfect show to help both new and seasoned gamblers get their bets right a majority of the time. Download and subscribe to the Locked On Bets podcast for daily picks and analysis. It is available wherever you get your podcasts, just like Locked On Reds. Coming up next week, we are going to be, we're back in the 5-day-a-week rotation, folks. So make sure you are subscribed. Coming up on Monday, Jonathan India is saying all of the right things, and he's also in the best shape of his life, we hear. So we're going to dig in, and Jeff added that last part, but we're going to dig into what Jonathan India has had to say and the role that he is looking to fulfill for the Reds in 2023. We've got all that and a whole lot more coming up next week, starting on Monday. All right, Jeff, we have decided to do this series of statistics and kind of help bring people along so that once the regular season gets upon us, once we reach opening day, everybody can kind of be on the same page as we're going through this on a daily basis, talking about how the Reds have performed, talking about what the players have done. And we're kind of breaking down the stats that you and I like to use. Yesterday, of course, was the WOBA. And you never did once. I went back and listened to the show. You never did one time explain what that stands for. So phooey on you.
Of course.
We just said WOBA over and over and over again. But today we're talking OPS plus. And that's one that I use all the time because, it's a league adjusted number that kind of tells you how one guy's doing versus another guy across the league. And, with 100 in OPS plus being the exact number that a league average replacement level player would earn, 100. So anything over 100. So if it's say 110, that player is 10% better than league average. And, we want to see a bunch of guys up around 140, 150, 160.
Yeah, that's one of the things I love about OPS plus is that with other statistics and WOBA is weighted on base average. I cannot believe I didn't put that in our script yesterday. I put so much else into it, but forgot to put what the darn thing actually stands for. But yeah, WOBA weighted on base average. It's a nice number that really encompasses what a hitter does as far as run production is concerned. But it's just like batting average and on base percentage and slugging percentage in that it's a decimal number. And there's something about my brain. I don't know. I mean, Steve, you tend to say that you're smarter than me, but there's something about my brain when I see a decimal and I just kind of shut down. OPS plus, no decimal. Plus, it's an easy way to compare a player to everything else because you might see a batting average and you're just like, well, is that good? Like, obviously, we know that over 300 is pretty good and it's pretty rare, but like on base percentage, slugging percentage, what are good numbers there? We know. With OPS plus, if it starts with a 1 and it has 2 numbers after that, that means that dude's pretty good. And if it's under 100, he's got some work to do. So with that being said, looking at last season and adjusting for players who actually played enough to actually qualify for this rate statistic on Baseball Reference, it was a rough year for the Redlegs when it comes to OPS plus. Let's take a look at this graph. This pretty graph that I made right here on YouTube. If you're listening on our audio version, I have a graph up for the Reds OPS plus leaders from last year. And like I said, these are qualified players. So if you didn't play X amount of games, if you didn't have X amount of at-bats, you didn't make this list. So that right off the bat is where I start with this because only 6. How many players played last year, Steve?
180.
Yeah, might as well have been that many. Only 6 of them qualified, for this rate statistic, which is in and of itself hilarious. The fact that Brandon Drury and Tommy Pham didn't even play the whole year as Reds, but they played enough while they were Reds to qualify for this statistic. And as we said, when it comes to OPS plus, what's good?
Over 100. Sorry. I was reading the comments. Yeah. What's good is over 100. Basically 100 is league average. So if we're looking at this, and I want to read through it real quick for the audio guys so that they don't tune us out. Number 1 is Brandon Drury with 128. So he was 28% above league average. Jonathan awesome. India comes in at second with 91. In spite of all of the injuries, in spite of the tremendous slumps that he had a couple times because of those injuries, he still was a 91 OPS plus on the year. Just behind him was everybody's favorite Farmer, Kyle Farmer, with 90 OPS plus. Tommy Pham was in 4th place with 88 OPS plus. Joey Votto, injured and all, 87 OPS plus for number 5 on the list. And here is the shocker, folks. The number 6th guy that qualified for the Cincinnati Reds on this list was Nick Senzel with a whopping 64 OPS plus.
I feel like you're going to meet Buck Farmer one day and he's going to be like, what the hell, man? Like, come on, I'm a pretty good farmer too. But no. That is the other part of this list that you look at and you're just like, man, Nick Senzel qualified? And Nick Senzel was that much below, 36% below league average. Like, that was kind of the overarching theme for me of this list was one guy, and he was traded before the deadline, was above league average. Everybody else was below. And really, when you were looking at some of the other guys and they didn't qualify, they didn't play enough, get enough plate appearances to qualify for the statistic, it really doesn't get much better.
No, and here's why I really like the OPS plus. I take you back to and sometimes the seasons blur for me. So if I have my seasons mixed up, please correct me. But I believe last season Kyle Farmer had that tremendous July. Like the rest of the season was not all that great, but was that 2 years ago? 2 years ago, had a tremendous July, right? And everybody was singing the praises of Kyle Farmer. Yeah. And you and I were both like, wait a minute, if you look at his performance as a whole, he was still like in the 70s for his OPS plus.
Yeah.
And so it allows you to not get caught up in the moment. It really lets you take a quick look at the totality of the performance over the course of a season and not let it get lost. So while Kyle Farmer was having that tremendous July and everybody was ready to put the captaincy on his chest and sign him to a 10-year extension or whatever the heck else Barry Larkin said, you could look at these numbers and know that we maybe needed to slow our roll just a little bit. So I really like this stat.
And the other thing about OPS plus, and it's not something we use a lot because we don't talk a lot about comparing players. Well, let's be honest, there hasn't been a lot to compare to the history of the Reds for the last few years, but OPS plus allows you to compare hitters. You can compare Joey Votto to Ted Williams. It's not going to be a good comparison because Ted Williams was like the best ever, but you can compare different guys to, you know, big red machine hitters and things like that, because the way that the formula works is it takes into account how the league performed that year, and it takes into account the ballpark that they played in, different numbers and things like that. So when you see the OPS plus stat, it is not just taking in the individual performance, but it's also considering the rest of the league. So there's so much to this, and we always love the ability to compare it, you know, to league average 100 and all this other stuff, but you can even take it back history wise and compare numbers that way. So there's just a beauty in the simplicity of OPS plus. And that's why whenever we talk about a hitter, that's the first thing we bring up.
And that thing you just mentioned about it takes into account the ballpark in which they played. That's important because, you know, let's face it, you know, a guy that plays 81 games at Great American Ballpark may have a little bit of an advantage over a guy that's playing 81 games at Comerica Park in Detroit. You know, those parks just play very much different. So this stat takes that into account, and it lets you still put a guy that's playing in Detroit next to a guy that's playing in Cincinnati and still be able to compare them and compare apples to apples versus comparing apples to oranges.
Heck, forget Comerica. You could compare, you know, somebody slugging in Great American Ballpark to somebody hitting in Ebbets Field back in the day. Like that's why this stat is so awesome. But that's why OPS plus is a huge one. And we're going to continue this series as we go through spring training, explaining the statistics that we like to use whenever we're evaluating players. But you know what, Steve? I know folks got questions. I know they got comments, and I know we're going to address those coming up next. Before we get into that, though, I wanted to let you know that the best way to stay within your diet but also have a tasty snack is to grab a Built Bar. Built Bar's got those amazing flavors. You're talking about cookie dough chunk. It's fresh on my mind because I just had one the other day. I got back from the gym, and I'm like, okay, I was good. I was healthy. Let's eat something terrible for myself. And I'm like, no, let's eat a Built Bar because it's got the chocolate. The chocolate's going to make you think that you're eating something sweet and unhealthy, but the macros are fantastic. Built Bar has the best macros when you're talking about any kind of snack. They've got up to 17 grams of protein, only 130 calories, and we're only talking about 4 grams of sugar here. You're not going to go crazy with the sugar if you eat a Built Bar, but it's going to taste phenomenal. Plus, we've got the puffs. Literally, they took a marshmallow, they covered it in chocolate, and they somehow made it healthy. Like, I don't even know. I don't understand a lot of things. I don't understand how Joey Votto plays baseball and does it so well. I don't understand how Hunter Green throws over 100 miles an hour. And I don't understand how you can cover marshmallow with chocolate and make it healthy, but Built did it. And you can go to Built.com and get you something right now. But did you know you can also go down the road to Sam's or Walmart and get you a couple of boxes? You can go to Walmart. In their pharmacy section, they got 4-bar boxes that have cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs. Just saying those names, does anybody think diet? No, but they will fit right in. Or if you go to Sam's Club, you can grab a 13-bar box with brownie batter or churro, and those are the puffs. So yeah, do it. Go to Built.com, go to Sam's, go to Walmart, get you some Built Bar. You can thank me later. Before we jump into your questions and comments, I want to let you know you can follow us in between shows. You can follow me at Jeff Carr with 3 Fs. You can follow Steve at S. Offenbaker with 2 Fs. And you can follow the show at Locked On Reds. Also, make sure that you're following us right here on YouTube, that you're subscribed, that we don't miss any kind of content we've got coming for you all spring training. Like Steve said, we're back to 5 days a week, every Monday through Friday, coming at you with content. Can't wait to talk about Jonathan. I'm not going to lie, man. That article fired me up. I think I read that article by Charlie Goldsmith about Jonathan India, and I immediately wanted to put at least a little bit of money on that 80-plus wins category. I still think that they're only going to win 75, but still 80-plus. I don't know. Like, the thing, Jonathan India just got me fired up, man. He just got me fired up.
Hey, and listen, before I forget, the Built Puff, is that how you reward yourself for not falling off the rowing machine when you go to the gym?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, that's what I thought. Listen, we have reached the favorite part of Aloha Friday. That is the questions and the comments, because our viewers never, ever disappoint. So as we go through this, folks, we're going to take some for the audio feed. There will be a wrap coming up here in 4 or 5 minutes for the audio feed. Audio listeners, don't worry. The rest of it comes at you as a bonus episode. And for the YouTube folks, just stick with us through when we wrap up that audio feed. We're going to roll right on through and then pick right back up answering your questions and comments. So, the Oakland A's made a trade, Jeff, and it's actually finds its way into being the first question of the day from Jason. He wants to know how we felt about JJ Bleday being traded when Nick Craw, Jason says, when Nick Craw made the comments about acquiring young outfielders, Bleday was immediately the player that he thought about. And he thought he would be a great fit in Cincinnati, and the A's didn't lose much. You and I talked about this off air. I'm a little bit indifferent on this. I think that, and you made a great point about why you didn't think this trade would work with Cincinnati.
Yeah, the deal that was made, the A's got JJ Bleday, which Bleday, I mean, that just makes sense anyway, but they traded a relief pitcher. They traded AJ Puck to the Marlins, and AJ Puck is a guy who they drafted as a starting pitcher. He just never really panned out. Injuries kind of messed with him. He got thrown into the bullpen, and he was pretty decent. Like, I'm not saying that he is closer quality. He's not going to be your bullpen ace, but he's a solid middle relief option. With that being said, if that was the price tag, who do the Reds trade in that case? We talk about this bullpen like if we answer questions, then this bullpen could be pretty good, but it's full of question marks. Who are you trading right now? You're not trading Tony Santillan. He's got a bad back. You're not trading TJ Antone, just had his second Tommy John surgery and a flexor strain, so he's still not healthy yet. And you got Lucas Sims, but he's coming off an injury. Does he have enough value to get JJ Bleday?
He's got to prove
do
it.
you actually want to get rid of Lucas Sims? Like, I think that the most value any relief pitcher on the roster currently for the Reds that they have is that they pan out, not that they could make a trade for them. I don't think the Marlins would have said yes to any relief pitcher on this roster, not named Alexis Diaz. And if you're trading Alexis Diaz, you're getting a heck of a lot more than JJ Bleday.
Yeah, I definitely. Pat checks in. Realistic expectation of Will Benson. Pat's going with somewhere between a 750 and 800 OPS. What do you think, Jeff? I think it's really hard to project what he's going to do. It's just such a very small sample size at the major league level that he got last year. Just a taste. I have high hopes for him. I don't know what a reasonable expectation is for him heading into the season.
Based on what he has done in AAA and based on his profile as a player, I'm going to say it's closer to 800. I could see it being between 800 and 820. Now, again, that's OPS. That's on base plus slugging. That's not taking into account batting average. There's going to be some folks that see his batting average and get flashbacks to Adam Dunn and start complaining. That's not what's going to happen here because he is a disciplined hitter. He's going to have a stark gap. I always say this about different players. I want to see that gap. If you have a low batting average, at least have an on-base percentage that's like 100 to like 120 points higher than that. Like I'm thinking of, do you remember Yasmani Grandal? I think it was, I can't remember if it was last year or 2 years ago. I think for the White Sox, hit like $180, but his on-base percentage was like 390. Like it was insane. And if that is what he's doing, and if the hits that he is getting are extra base hits, that OPS is still going to be pretty high. So I think 800, 820 is where I'm looking at for Will Benson.
BR7 says happy Aloha Friday and hope everybody
Woba
had a
Thursday.
great Woba Thursday. We're not doing Woba Thursday, right? That's
No.
not
If we're doing Woba anything, it's Woba Wednesday. And we get the
Oh
alliteration.
my God.
Woba Wednesday.
We're not going there. All right. Troy checks in and says, are the Reds young pitchers the next iteration of Maddox, Glavine, and Smoltz era from the 90s Braves? Now, this spins out of something that Hunter Green said, right?
Mhm.
Isn't that where this started? Wasn't Hunter talking to one of the media guys and kind of made this comparison?
I did hear that, and I think it spins kind of from what Jonathan India is talking about, instilling confidence in the team and things like that. Dear God, they got to do a lot for anybody to consider them anywhere near these three guys. Like that's the highest of bars. Like, is that the best three starting pitcher? Like the best, Three Musketeers trio of starting pitchers ever? Because I cannot think of another trio that's anywhere near them.
Yeah, and this group of
I love
pitchers,
that. I love the confidence. I'm just,
Yeah.
That's high.
This group of pitchers, Jeff, is very different from that group of pitchers. Of those three pitchers, only John Smoltz was really a power pitcher. Maddox and Glavine both nibbled and finessed and worked the corners and did things that, none of these three do. Hunter Green is the power of the power. He set a record last year for throwing the most fastballs, right? And then you've got Nick Lodolo, who is also kind of a power guy and working that back foot slider on top of a major fastball. And then Graham Ashcraft, who is maximum effort all the time. So I think it's a whole different style.
But I can also see where they're coming from. They're not necessarily saying this is who we are. They're saying we think our production can get to this level. And I love that feeling. I love that confidence. I love the bravado of that. It's just that is so high a level to say you're attaining that I want to see it. But I don't want them to be like, oh my gosh, we put way too much pressure on ourselves to be this good. Like that's like, I mean, that would be like Tyler Stevenson saying, I'm going to be Johnny Bench in like 2 years. Like,
well, it's exactly the same thing because you're talking about comparing to Hall of Famers, right? So it's exactly the same thing. So listen, Jeff, for the audio feed, let's go ahead and wrap up right there. Audio listeners, that's going to do it for this edition of Locked on Reds. Don't forget, in your podcasting feeds will be a bonus episode with the rest of the Q&A that we're going to do here on YouTube in just a second. But for the audio folks, coming up on Monday, don't forget, we're going to be talking Jonathan India. And now that you've made Locked on Reds your first listen, go make the Locked on MLB Prospects podcast your second listen. Host Lindsey Crosby is a prospect encyclopedia, and he's going to give you all of the information you need on Major League Baseball's stars of tomorrow. The Locked on MLB Prospects podcast is free and available wherever you get your podcasts, just like Locked on Reds. And we are going to be back in your feed 5 days a week next week because Locked on Reds is going to keep you locked on every single day. All right, Jeff, we are just getting started on the questions and the comments from the viewers here on YouTube. Really enjoy hearing from everybody. Austin's checking in and says that our assessment of Will Benson made it seem like he's a lot like Joey Gallo type of player. Good defense, lots of power, lots of walks, and a good amount of strikeouts. Thoughts? That's probably a fair comparison is my thought.
very good. Yeah.
That's a pretty apt description of Will Benson. Lots of good defense, lots of power. We've heard from the Locked on Guardians guys and just looking at his numbers that he's done a really good job of working walks when he gets even into 0-2 counts. So, that seems to hold true. Lots of walks, but when you're trying to hit that much power, you are going to strike out a little bit. So he has a good amount of strikeouts as well.
Yeah. I think that, Joey Gallo is an apt comparison. I just keep thinking of Adam Dunn because he's one of my favorite players, but Joey Gallo and Adam Dunn were very similar type hitters as well, although Gallo much better defensively. I never thought that Adam Dunn was a good defender at all. So that's going to be something that I'm excited to see Will Benson for because he's got the range and he's got the arm to still play center field, especially in Great American Ballpark, that you don't necessarily have to have that much range to be a good center fielder at, but he could still do it in other fields as well.
David Pemberton. Dave, how you doing? Good to hear from you. He checks in and says, what would our ideal viewing experience be for watching Reds games on television after MLB takes over from Bally Sports / Diamond? As you guys, I'm sure, have all heard by now, and we've talked about this, the regional sports networks are filing for bankruptcy. They missed their interest payment. The filing is coming. And just now is a matter of figuring out what happens next. Dave says they have to make these games easier to access to grow the fan base. So listen, I live out in Hawaii. You guys all know that. And for me, Major League Baseball blacks out every Major League Baseball team from Seattle all the way down to San Diego. All of those games are blacked out. So every time the Reds are on a West Coast road trip, I have to get very creative. What I want to see Major League Baseball do is finally utilize this situation to get rid of the darn blackouts. They seem to be moving in the right direction. If you are a subscriber to MLB TV, they've made some announcements that they're going to make minor league baseball more accessible through the MLB.TV app. And you can watch those games on TV. I think that Manfred has talked enough about the blackouts now that when whatever happens, eliminating those blackouts is going to be part of the deal.
Yeah, I think too, one of the things that he was talking about the other day, Rob Manfred, he was like, I envision the ability for a fan to go on the MLB.TV app and watch whatever game they want to watch, whether it's in market, out of market, whatever. So I'm like, he's planning on this. He's planning on getting rid of blackouts. I think the most ideal situation, to answer Dave's question, is exactly that, because we're in a world where cable isn't really that much of a thing anymore. People are cutting the cord. And I've told you, and I've told anybody that wants to hear it, like, as soon as Major League Baseball does this, I'm done with cable. Like, I don't need it anymore because I have it, so I can simply watch Bally Sports and watch Reds games. But I think that is the ideal situation because the MLB.TV app can be on any streaming device, can be on your phone, can be on, your computer, whatever it is. So you don't have to have a certain setup to watch a game. Then it's just right now, if you live in that area, you're blacked out, and it doesn't make any sense to really pay for it unless you live in Cincinnati and you're a Mariners fan or something. So it really helps out the people who are not necessarily fans of their local team, but it absolutely alienates the local fans right now. And I think that when they fix that, it's going to be so much easier to grow the game because it's going to be so much easier to watch the game.
Absolutely. Listen, there's several regions throughout the country. It's not just Hawaii that run into these problems. Iowa is another state that has a ridiculous amount of blackouts. And, if Major League Baseball is serious about, trying to create a youth movement, this is where it starts. Kids have to be able to have access to the game, especially in areas where there is no Major League Baseball. They have to be able to watch it. So I really hope that we are just, a very short period of time away from this finally getting fixed. Yeah. Listen, Pat checks in, Jeff. Pat is in with a hot take, and I want to talk about this. He says he listened to Wednesday's pod about Jose Barrero and that he has a feeling Jose Barrero will be on another team's roster on opening day. You want to take this one first, or you want me to go first?
That's intriguing to me. The only way I see that happening is through waivers. I don't think it'd be a trade, but he's a guy that, I still think other teams would look at him and say, we still don't know what we don't know about him. Like, if the Reds decide to move on from him, they would probably, waive him. Although I think he's got options. So I think that that's the other part of this, is that they wouldn't just outright cut him. So they'd have to trade him. So probably not going to happen this year, but yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, there's a 0% chance. We almost never say that. There's a 0% chance that Jose Barrero
he'll be in Louisville if he's not insensitive.
For another team. He'll be in Louisville. He has an option remaining. If for some reason someone beats him out, and listen, we're talking about then like Kevin Newman has had to play way over his head and make it to where they don't want to play Jose Barrero. Ellie De La Cruz has had to come into spring training and put on some kind of offensive onslaught that has just forced the Reds to start him at shortstop on opening day. A lot of things have to happen for Jose Barrero to not have a job on this team on opening day. Now, I'm not saying at some point in time in this season, he wouldn't get sent down to make room for these other guys coming up if he can't perform. But for opening day, no, he's either going to be the opening day shortstop in Cincinnati or he's going to be the opening day shortstop in Louisville, but he's not going to be playing for another team.
Now, you could amend that hot take, Pat, to say that he'll be on another team next opening day, and that could be a thing because he only has one more. This is his last option year. So when they use that option this year, bam, doesn't have it next year. So if he doesn't make the team next year, then he'd have to be, passed through waivers. And then at that point, I would find it interesting because I think that, there would still be some sort of intrigue even next year on Jose Barrero to see if you could turn him around.
Seth Pryor checks in, says, great move by the Reds to limit Stevenson at catcher in 2023. But then he goes on to say Tyler Stevenson needs to be the full-time catcher in 2024. Seth, I disagree, my friend. I think that this is the right direction. And once they make this move, there's no turning back. I think a split of time between catcher, first base, DH is how Tyler Stevenson needs to be treated for however long he's playing for Cincinnati. That bat is just so valuable. And Road Roller checks in and says the same thing. Stevenson is most valuable at the plate, not behind the plate. I got in, Jeff, I don't know if you saw, but I got into it with all kinds of people on Twitter yesterday because, I sent out a tweet responding to what David Bell did in announcing his plan for Tyler Stevenson. And I said, I thought Tyler Stevenson could hit 40 home runs. And actually, because Twitter limits my characters, I actually said Tyler Stevenson will hit 40 home runs. Let me clarify. 40 home runs, I think, is the ceiling. I think in a perfect world where everything goes right, he could flirt with 40. I did put a Twitter poll up though, Jeff, because I got a lot of pushback on this about just how many home runs that Tyler Stevenson could hit. And so I did a poll with about almost 450 votes, guessing the range of where Tyler Stevenson goes for home runs. Is it going to be less than 20, 20 to 30, 30 to 40, 40 to 50? 63% of the 450 people that voted say Tyler Stevenson is good for 20 to 30 home runs. Another 15% say 30 to 40. Only 2% say above 40. And 20% of you people think he's not even going to hit 20. And I have a problem with that take.
But Steve, okay, first off, before I get into my feelings on the home run range, which I will give you in a moment, you work with me. Don't you know that optimism does not fly in Reds country?
Oh, I found out real fast.
It don't fly, man.
I took a beat down yesterday on Twitter.
People do not like it. I don't know why, but no, I look at Tyler Stevenson's home run rate. I think it's somewhere between 26 and 35. It's a wide range, and a lot of that has to do with health and how much does he play. But I think he has the ability to hit between 30 and 40 home runs. 40, golly, if it's 40, he better be getting MVP votes at that point.
That's the ceiling.
Yeah.
And where I said, and I got it, and I had a back and forth with Carlos Guevara, and I love Carlos, and a lot of times he ends up being right. And what I was trying to get across was 40 is the ceiling. If you set an over under on Tyler Stevenson in 2023 at 30, I would take the over.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree there. And the way that he hits the ball, he hits line drives. He doesn't sell out for home runs, but it's just, he's got so much power in that swing that when he makes solid contact, he can hit home runs. So he's not trying to sell out for the power. You're still going to see that nice high average. You're still going to see a good OPS because all of that's going to come together in a nice little, Tyler Stevenson package. But that home run, that home run total could definitely be pretty impressive at the end of the year, depending on, how healthy he is throughout the year, because this could be another scenario too, where maybe he gets an injury, but it's well enough that he can play in games, but it does limit his ability. So there's still, I think this is where everyone's trepidation with any optimistic take regarding Tyler Stevenson comes from, is that they're like, we don't know if he's going to stay healthy, and they don't buy into the fact that all of his injuries last year were fluky.
let's stay on that thought and let's stay with Tyler Stevenson for a minute. Seth comes back at us with, we have so many great infield prospects and so many players that can play first base. Stevenson needs to be catching 120 games in 2024. Now, 120 games, that's what Tyler told us. Looked us both in the eye. We had him here on the show. He said 120 games with no fatigue. He wants to catch 120 games. So let me ask you this. And Seth, I hear you. And this is what Tyler said. So I mean, I really can't fault what you're saying here, Seth. But let me ask you this, Jeff. The 120 number, that's what Tyler said he felt he could catch and it not have negative impacts on his offensive performance. If you recall, that's the question I asked him. The question was, how many games can you catch and not be exhausted by the end of the year and have it not impact what you do in the lineup? He said 120. So this plan that David Bell has rolled out, does that mean that they are trying to further reduce his games at catcher to protect him from injury? Or has the team made a determination that 120 number is too big and that really they need to keep him around 65, 70 games behind the plate in order to avoid him being fatigued?
See, the thought in my mind with this is that I think it's 50-50. I think 50% of this is, if a 50% chance is they are turning him into a first baseman. The other 50%, the other side of this coin that I'm looking at is, are they ramping him back up to be that 120 game catcher? And maybe if it's not 120, maybe if it's 100 games or something like that, do they feel like, okay, maybe his injuries were fluky, but they all had the common theme of him being behind the plate. Let's move him out from behind the plate. Let's see if that takes away that, at least mitigates it enough where he doesn't get those bad injuries. And if that's the case, then we can work him back in to being behind the plate. Because that was a huge conversation last year amongst beat writers, amongst broadcasters, amongst everyone around the Reds, including us. We were a part of this, that we wanted him to become a first baseman because we saw the injuries, we saw the reason for this, and it was because he was catching. And there's so many other people that are just like, well, the best version of the Reds is with Tyler Stevenson behind the plate. And as of right now, there's nobody else that's pushing him there. There's, Matt Nelson's not really pushing the issue. Daniel Veoheen, Logan Tanner, and Cade Hunter, none of those guys are close enough to the point.
Nowhere near ready.
That you're like, yes, we do have our next plan at catcher. So it's kind of hard to say, yes, they need to be doing this right away. So I think part of this is they're going to see how those guys play out. They're going to see the injury process of Tyler Stevenson, and then they're going to make a determination as to the best course of the future for him and for the team, whether it's first base or catcher.
See, because they're even going above what I initially said that I would like to see. If you remember, I wanted it basically to be like a 30% catching, 33% catching, 33% first base, 33% DH, and then you get that last 1%. An extra spot somewhere, but I wanted it to be pretty evenly divided. They've
40,
gone as
40,
high
20
now as to say is 40. Yeah. So, for me, I like this and they could do this the rest of the way as far as I'm concerned, because, I don't think that the best version of the Reds is Tyler behind the plate. I disagree with you, what you said there. The best version of the Reds is Tyler at the plate 150 games. And I think this is the best way to accomplish that. Limit the number of innings behind the plate.
The only thing that I'm thinking about that is there's got to be somebody like there's the person behind the plate has to be performing. Like if Kirk Casale and Luke Maile come out here and are the 2023 versions of Michael Papierski and Mark Kolesvari and all this other stuff, we've got a problem. And that's where David Bell, if there are no injuries, David Bell may still have to reevaluate this plan. However, I do have a lot more hope in Kirk Casale and Luke Maile being better than those guys. It was kind of funny because I was listening to a Baseball America podcast the other day, and they were talking about Reds catching prospects and things like that. And they did a thing, and obviously they're not like Reds fans per se; they're just baseball fans. And they did a thing. They're just like 7 catchers played for the Cincinnati Reds, not named Tyler Stevenson last year. Can you name all 7? And can you name all 7?
No, Papirski, Colesbury, Robinson, uh, Romine. Not named Stevenson, right? Okie.
Yep.
That's it. I can do 5 of the 7.
There's one other guy, and he started the year with the team, and then whenever Tyler Stevenson initially went down, he played pretty well, but then he himself got hurt, and that's Aramis Garcia. He broke camp with the team as the backup.
That's
but
right.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. It's like there's that many guys. The Reds can't do that again. They cannot do a thing if Tyler Stevenson is healthy. They definitely can't do a thing where if Kurt Casale and Luke Maile struggle, that they're just like, well, this is the plan. We're just going to keep rolling with this.
Hey, Jeff, Caleb Ledford checks in and agrees with you. So I'm going to put this up here because it doesn't happen very often. Somebody agreed with you. Moose was the very definition of sunk cost, just like Homer Bailey was at the end. Caleb says, completely agree that it was addition by subtraction. Yeah, I think that's pretty good take, Jeff.
I think that the moment where I was sold on the idea of Matt Kemping Moose was when I watched him bend over to try and pick up a ground ball, and it looked like me getting up off the couch and bending over to try and pick up the chip that I just dropped. I'm like, no.
We need the video from your gym of you falling off the rowing machine. I think you keep describing
Moose
these
is still more
athletic
than that. I will say that.
Listen, Kurt Casale's getting some love in the chat. Jared on Vinyl says that he was so excited to have Kurt back. Really solid player all the way around. Danny says he was very disappointed when Kurt left. Glad to have him back. I thought this was a great signing. I mean, I know we flirted with the idea of it being Tucker Barnhart, but I think things worked out exactly the way that they needed to work out, and bringing in Kurt Casale and Luke Maile, combining to be the other 60% of the catching core. I think things worked out the way that the Reds needed them to.
And from all reports, Kurt was kind of bummed whenever he left. Like he's happy to be back. So I'm very intrigued at that, because I think David Bell and Nick Kroll, and they all had this plan in place when they went out to get. They already knew. They're like, these are the games that Tyler Stevenson is going to catch, and these are the games that he's not going to catch. So we need to find people to fill these in. And when they said we're going to do it with one guy or two guys, they thought, yeah, two's probably better. If we're expecting Tucker Barnhart to be this healthy for this many games and still pay him as much as they were probably going to, they were probably going to have to pay him twice as much as they paid Kurt Casale. So, and for multiple years, because he got a multi-year deal with the Cubs. Kurt Casale and Luke Maile are on 1-year deals. So that I like what the Reds did as opposed to bringing back Tucker Barnhart.
I lost my audio, Jeff. Sorry. I'm fixing it right now. There, I got it back. All right. Throw your graphic back up for OPS plus. John Park made a comment that 3 of the top 4 on the list were traded. So that's true. Brandon Drury, Kyle Farmer, and Tommy Pham are all gone. And the reason I wanted you to do that, and I wanted to put that back up there for just a second, Jeff, is when you trade away 3 of your top 4 in any category, anywhere that you're looking, you think that was a huge hit, but really only Brandon Drury was above league average, above replacement level. So when you say 3 of the top 4 were traded away, that's really not a big hit, other than, I'll say, okay, I'll concede that, you trading away the best hitter on the team at the time, which was Brandon Drury, that's a hit. But the rest of these guys were all underperforming when they were traded.
Right. And I think too, the important thing with this is that we are going to look back. This is not a hot take. This is an easy take. We're going to look back at this year, and that list is going to be longer. There's going to be more than 6 players on it, and it's going to look better. We're going to have better hitters. We're going to see better performances from India, from Stevenson. We're going to see Spencer Steer up there. We might see Ellie De La Cruz up there when he gets up there, because Ellie De La Cruz is going to mash. I firmly believe that. And we might have a couple of surprises up there as well. Like, I think Jake Fraley actually had a nice OPS plus. He just didn't qualify for, and I should have looked up what the number of plate appearances were, but he just didn't have that many plate appearances to qualify for this list.
Right. And we know it was more than 50. Maybe it was games because, we know Tyler Stevenson's not on this list and he was in 50 games. And I know that because that's where we said all of our locked on MVP voting was at 50 so that Tyler could be in the conversation. So, Danny says he doesn't understand how SOB, that's son of Bob, Phil Castellini, gets to be in front of a mic. I'm going to tell you how, because Daddy said so. Listen, Phil Castellini is the son of the guy that owns the team. So if he wants to talk, who's going to tell him no besides Bob? And I really think at this point, Bob Castellini is in his 80s, folks. He is checked out. Phil is running the day-to-day operations of the Cincinnati Reds. Phil can do whatever he wants unless he screws up in such a way that Major League Baseball steps in and forces some kind of sale. And if you heard Rob Manfred's comments and Jeff played them on the show, they didn't rise to the level of being in that neighborhood. So, hopefully Phil figures it out. Because listen, at the end of the day, the Castellinis are going to own this team for a long time. I really don't see them selling this team. There's nothing else that they can do to make as much money as they're making in Major League Baseball. It's physically impossible. It is not able to be done. They can't sell enough cabbage to make as much money as they're making from Major League Baseball. So I really hope that Phil figures it out and is able to eventually be the owner of this team and not be in the way of its success. I really hope he finds a way to do that.
And that's the one thing. And it's not sexy. It's not going to get anybody's attention when I say it, because we've said it a couple of times this offseason. But I think the one thing that he has done that it seems to be, at least, it's not as if he came out and said it, it's not as if Nick Krall came out and said it, but it sure seems like Phil has given Nick Krall a budget and has backed off. And that is the best that he could do. I get it. We want them to spend more. We want them to have a bigger payroll. That is not something that we are, arguing here. What we're saying is, as much as he might open his mouth and it might, really frustrate us to the point that a lot of folks are just like, I'm done with the Reds. Like, I think behind closed doors, when it comes to running this team, he has taken a step back and he's not meddling, which is not something that we could say in the past decade. Like, ever since they've been here, there has always been an influence from the ownership office. And it sure seems like over the last year and a half, maybe even 2 years, that's gone away.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I mean, famously, Dick Williams had actually arranged a trade of Billy Hamilton that the Reds were going to get something in return for Billy Hamilton, and Bob Castellini nixed that deal. So I think you're spot on with that. At least Phil is letting the baseball people do the baseball things and just setting the budget. So Greg checks in and says, happy Aloha Friday. He loves the idea of us explaining some of the more detailed statistics. One stat that a lot of guys talk about is WAR. Would love to see us explain WAR. I think WAR is going to be on the list. Oh, yeah. And you guys know that every time we talk Hall of Fame, I talk WAR, because that's the stat that I use when we're talking about, should a guy be a Hall of Famer? Is Joey Votto a Hall of Famer? Is Joey Votto better than Tony Perez? Is all of those things. I use that WAR statistic because I think it really does a good job at defining those kind of things. So Jeff, I think that's probably on our list coming up in a future episode.
Next week for sure. We're one of the first ones we're going to talk about early on in the week as well, because we've talked about a couple of hitting statistics. I want to get into FIP, fielding independent pitching, and xFIP. These are numbers that are like ERA, but as folks who talk about numbers and metrics and things like that say, these are more reliable than ERA. And they're numbers that I love to use whenever I'm talking about pitchers. So that's going to be early on next week, and WAR is definitely going to be up there as well. It's something that I want to understand a little bit deeper, because I have a high level understanding of WAR where it's just like, yes, it's a cumulative stat. It's not something that, if you have a really good month of April, but you have a really bad rest of the year, that you're going to get a lot of WAR. That's not going to be the case. So you have to have sustained success with it over a long period of time. So that is why that is such a number that you will see other teams with high WAR players, and the Reds just don't have it, because we do talk about good months for certain players, and then the rest of the year they're just, whatever, they're middling. They're not even.
There's only one great WAR guy on the Reds roster right now.
Yeah.
And he's injured.
Yeah. But that's definitely gonna be something we talk about next week.
Debbie Brown is here. Debbie, always glad for Debbie to join us. She says Jonathan India got married over the offseason. I think I heard that. Maybe I heard that, but it would make sense. Jonathan India has come in to camp this year, demonstrating a new kind of maturity, and I could see that all of those pieces play together: the personal life, the professional life, the baseball life, all of the things kind of match up. So, you got a guy that's, starting his family and has gotten married, is talking about being a leader of the team. I like, and I know you want to get into this Monday, so we're not going to steal all the thunder on that. So Debbie, tune in on Monday because Jeff has some things to say about the direction that Jonathan India is going.
So fired up about that article from Charlie Goldsmith. And yeah, just a little bit of a taste, a little bit of a tease to our talk there. Like, one of the things he talks about in this article, he talks about so many things: the mentality, what he's saying, how he's presenting himself to the team. Jonathan India cut 10 pounds because he realized he bulked up too much last year and he just couldn't do the things that he wanted to do. So he cut 10 pounds this offseason. Dude's ready to go. I'm stoked.
BR7 says, one thing that sticks out from when Tom Nichols was on this week is the bad strikeout rate for the young players. Will the Reds' new hitting coach, Joel McKeithen, be able to help these guys? I'm going to go first on this one, Jeff. No. Joel is not going to be able to help these guys. First off, he's not going to really be working with these guys until they're already at the major league level. And I have long held the opinion that once at the major league level, there's not a whole lot that the hitting coach can do in season other than provide the guys with opportunities to fix things themselves. Get them the film, get them the data, get them the analytics, help them, point them in a direction, but ultimately the player has to do the work. The problem with all of these young players and their strikeout rates is many of them have a very similar body type. They have giant strike zones that they're having to learn to defend. Pitchers are throwing some of the ugliest, nastiest breaking stuff in the history of the game, and that stuff's just hard to hit. And then they're all trying to hit home runs. So what my hope is what really is going to fix those strikeout rates is the fact that we've taken away the shift, that we're trying to put a bigger emphasis on getting people on base and having some excitement on the base pass and going back to the old way of hitting, take the dips out of the swing, drive the ball the other way, have some action that way, have players learn to once again defend the strike zone when there's 2 strikes, choke up a little bit on the bat, drive the ball the other way. Those are the things that have led to the increased strikeout rate, and no one hitting coach is going to fix any of that.
Yeah, there was something that whenever he was announced as the hitting coach, I believe it was I can't remember if C-Tran or if it was Bobby Nightingale that had this, but they were talking to him and he mentioned like our organizational philosophy has kind of gotten a little bit out of whack over the last few years. And he said, we're going to go back to more of a focus of line drive hitting. We're not going to be worrying about trying launch angle and all that stuff. It's like, yeah, there's a little bit of launch angle involved when it comes to line drives, but he said, I want, contact quality to be a thing. And, it's that time of year where I'm really itching to get out on a golf course. And so I'm watching all these videos to try and fix my swing before I get out on the golf course. And everyone's always talking about contact quality over, your swing speed, over how much you're putting into it, over whatever you're doing with your arms or whatever like that. If you make good contact, you're going to hit the ball farther. And that's the same with baseball. If you hit that sweet spot, things are going to happen. And it's not about, can you dip that shoulder? Can you tap that toe? It's just about making a good, solid contact. And that's kind of what they're going back to.
Wait, you haven't been playing golf? I've been playing golf.
I went to the driving range. Oh, shit.
I've been
just got into the 60s for the first time this year on Wednesday. And I think we had 30-mile-an-hour winds. So yeah, I went to the driving range where I'm not going to I'm not going to care about the ball that goes way lost.
Come visit me, Jeff. We'll go play. Seth says that he attends a lot of Dayton Dragons games every
tomorrow.
Year. He's curious to see which prospects will start at Dayton
tomorrow. Seth, we've got an extra episode.
I was just going to see if you were going to tease to that. Yeah, go ahead with that.
Got it posting tomorrow morning. So we had our great conversation with Tom Nichols, kind of previewing the players that we can expect in camp, the players that we can expect to watch in spring training. But we did also talk about the guys who are expected to begin the year in Dayton. Spoiler alert, is going to be a lot of fun yet again. Probably not as much talent as last year, but still quite a bit. And there's going to be a top 5 prospect that shows up in Dayton on opening day.
Caleb checks back in and says, this is funny. How unlikable is Phil Castellini? He made people applaud Rob Manfred this week. That is quite an achievement. Yeah, that's a special skill set, folks.
I'm trying to think of like a level, but yeah, it's very low right now.
Jeff, we have a question for you. This comes from Chad, the quirky picker. He wants to know if you're going to be doing any radio work with the Reds radio network this year.
I believe I'm on the list as a backup to a backup's backup, so I should be maybe once or twice. Every so often people are hitting me up. I got the chance. I was on ESPN 1530 this past week, and was also on with Dan Carroll. I think that was at 11 o'clock on Wednesday night. Yeah, I think it was Wednesday night, 11 o'clock on Wednesday night. So every so often they just they pop up like that. So,
and definitely you got to do the first turn, but we're going to be semi-regular.
Yep.
Go ahead and tease that one.
Yeah. So, every week as well. And I apologize because I did my best to look this up and see exactly when it airs, but you can find the podcast form of the show. It's through 97.1 The Fan in Columbus, but it's the Ohio Sports Magazine show. And Paul Keels, who some may know is the voice of this football team that's north of Cincinnati. But he talks with us about spring training. I was on this week. Steve will be on next week, but that's the Ohio Sports Magazine radio show. It's a long one. They really should have found a shorter name. But yeah, no, Paul's a lot of fun to talk to. And we were talking about spring training storylines.
Seth was talking about Dave Pemberton's question relating back to Bally Sports Ohio, and Seth's asking, will the Reds TV location all season, will that be Bally Sports? I kind of think it will be. I can't imagine they're going to change gears mid-season. Now, that being said, Rob Manfred did say that no matter what happens, people will be able to see the games. They said that if for whatever reason Bally Sports decides, somewhere in June, we're done, Major League Baseball is prepared and ready to step in and do local broadcasts. They're ready to do it. So I think that, will it be Bally Sports? We can't answer that. Is there any danger of not being able to see the full Red schedule this season? No. Major League Baseball has already said they're going to do whatever has to be done to ensure that through the 2023 baseball season, we get to see the games. And then whatever the new way of doing things is, whether that's MLB.TV, streaming exclusively, whatever that looks like, they'll roll that out in 2024. So you don't have to worry about losing out on Reds games in 2023.
Yeah, I think it's whenever a football team sells the advertising naming rights to their field, but they keep the stadium the same name or something like that. Like, I think it's going to be like Bally Sports brought to you by MLB.TV, something like that at the worst.
Elijah says the MLS deal with Apple Plus is a good step in the right direction. A similar deal either on their own platform or some experienced platform would be the best. That's his suggestion. Major League, if you don't have MLB.TV, that is a really one of the few things that Major League Baseball has gotten right. That's totally right. A really, minus the blackouts, it is a really good product. You can watch a game and drop the radio broadcast over top of the video feed if that's what you want to do. You can listen to the opposing team some if you want to. There's a lot of features built into that thing. If they just go with that, that's not the end of the world. They're just going to have to make a way for people that don't necessarily stream to make that product available locally on some kind of cable network as well. But I feel like that product is kind of good to go already. So Major League Baseball TV, I think, is fantastic.
They've got the platform. They just need to get the rights or whatever it is, the legality of it all in step so that they can get rid of the blackouts, because literally everything is already there.
Seth also says college baseball starts. That's right. If you're looking for college baseball, is a great watch. I talk about Hawaii all the time. They have such a fun baseball program. So Is all baseball everywhere, between college baseball and minor league baseball, going to be available on the MLB app? I don't know how I'm going to squeeze in all this baseball, Jeff.
Yeah, and you got college baseball on ESPN Plus as well. You can watch a lot of those games.
Here we go. Oh, sorry. John Park says Stevenson needs to catch 120 games, but can't. We're looking at a logjam at first in DH. I don't know that I agree that there's a logjam at either of those positions. What's the logjam at first base? Joey Votto, who's injured. Will Myers, who's an outfielder. Mm-hmm. Tyler Stevenson, who's just stepping into that role. And then CES whenever he arrives.
Yeah, I was going to say the only thing that I can think of is CES, and people are considering him, but I don't necessarily know that the Reds have committed to him not playing third base just yet. And I know that the reports of his defense are uninspiring, but they're also not like bad. Like he's not going to come up and be Edwin Encarnacion at third base. Like he's going to be okay. He just doesn't necessarily have the best arm. So I do wonder if the Reds try him out at third base, work out his arm a little bit, maybe try and see if they can improve that. Then he becomes their third baseman, at least for the short term, because until Joey is no longer a Red, which I'm still holding that hope that we got one more year at least after this. But until he is no longer a Red, Joey Votto is going to be the first baseman, and we're not going to push him off and force him to play DH, full time or anything like that. But I think that's why the plan for Tyler Stevenson is 40% catcher, 40% DH, and then 20% first base, because those are the days that Joey will be the DH or he will just have a straight off day. Joey's not playing 162 games this year.
No. Let's circle back to Gimpleg. So I was having a hard time following what he was saying, but we'll go here now. He doesn't think that there is no turning back. He says he did not get into it with me yesterday. This is about Tyler Stevenson. But that Tyler is definitely most valuable at the plate when he is behind the plate. Okay. I understand the point that Tyler Stevenson is one of the better hitting catchers in the league. He's top tier as far as that goes. But the fact of the matter is, he hasn't been able to remain healthy when he's back there. And we're talking about a team that needs maximum positional flexibility in a lot of areas. And Tyler Stevenson being able to play first base and DH gives you that. Is he the most valuable to the Reds as a catcher? I don't know. Is he the most valuable as far as his ability to make money for himself as a catcher? Yeah, he's going to get paid more as a catcher than he would get paid as a DH or get paid as a first baseman. But, I don't know that prioritizes the team winning. Tyler has said he's willing to do what's asked of him. And right now, what's being asked of him is to play 40% of the time as a catcher and play the rest at first base and designated hitter. And he has openly said he's willing to do that. And I would have to say that he has expressed that same sentiment behind the scenes when none of us are listening. And if he hadn't, this wouldn't be happening. I don't think. So I think he's on board. I think we're making a bigger deal about the money and about his value and all of these things than the organization is making and that Tyler Stevenson is making. So, I think the Reds have come up with a solution where it's, a great compromise where everybody gets a little bit of what they want. Tyler gets to catch, which is what he wants to do at least part of the time. The Reds get that bat in the lineup most of the time, and that helps everybody else around him have more success. It protects other hitters in the lineup. It allows the Reds to have their best lineup on the field for many more games than they would than if he was just exclusively a catcher.
And I think too, and we talked a lot about OPS plus in today's episode. I'll throw this graph back up here for our YouTube crowd. But when it comes to this list, Brandon Drury led the team at 128. We've said this. Tyler Stevenson did not have enough plate appearances or games played to qualify for this list, but his OPS plus was 130. He would have been the top of this list. He is the team's best hitter. And if there is a situation where they can get him into the lineup with more certainty more times than if he were to have a fluke injury behind the plate, that's what I want to see. I don't want to see them forcing the issue, putting a square peg into a round hole here of, well, he's just not going to get hurt this year behind the plate. Let me say it was fluky. Betting on flukes to not happen is silly. So you need to have a plan. And when we talk about this team for the majority of our lifetimes, it seems like they haven't had a plan. Their plan's been hope. This is not hope. And this is beautiful.
BR7 wants to talk pitching. Let's talk pitching for a minute, Jeff. He thinks Connor Overton is going to do good things this year if he stays healthy. Where do you see Connor Overton fitting into this? Is he gonna fight for that fourth or fifth starter role? I kind of have him in my bullpen column. I think that's where he's going to at least start the year.
I know we've talked about Connor Overton as a bullpen type pitcher. It's interesting to me because if you were to ask me who was the better pitcher between Connor Overton and Luke Weaver, I think Connor Overton's the better pitcher. And I've been the one that's saying, like, I think that, Luke Weaver grabs a rotation spot. I could be very wrong on that. And it could be Connor Overton out of opening day. And again, these 4 and 5 spots, hopefully 1, 2, 3 stays the same. We have Green, Lodolo, Ashcraft. They're healthy. They're there all year long. 4 and 5, that's going to be a revolving door. That's going to be a saloon door in a cowboy movie because it's just going to keep changing. And unless someone really grabs a hold of it, which I don't have a strong feeling as to any one person just grabbing a hold of one of those rotation spots and not letting go, then I think we're going to see Connor Overton in this rotation at some point this season. I think we'll see Overton, we'll see Sessa, we'll see Weaver, we'll see Justin Dunn a little bit, in which I know that we've said that he's the most valuable in the bullpen, but I think we see him in the rotation still some because they're still trying to figure some things out with him. And I mean, we see the rookies, Williamson, Stout. We might see Abbott later on this season. Like, there's going to be so many different pitchers get a start for the Reds this year. And that's the way it should be because they've got to figure out who's going to fill out that rotation coming into next year, or else they got to make moves. Because that's something else we haven't talked about either. And that's really the theme of an entire show. So I don't know that we can really go too deep on this at this moment, but next season, this year, we talked about, the best offseason moves in an offseason where they didn't make too many moves were, Stevenson and Moose. Next year cannot be a lean offseason. We're done with this whole thing of, just keep, hoping that prospects come up and make out the whole team. We got to have the core in place this year, and then next year we supplement. Because that's what the Rays do. That's what the Guardians do. That's what any small market team that has success does. They build the core and the majority of their team with prospects from within, and they supplement other positions with free agents and trades. And this offseason has to be busy in that regard.
Hey, Jeff, check this out. Oh, we have a JoJo Jammer sighting. If you don't follow JoJo Jammer on Twitter, JoJo Jammer has been around from like the early days of Jeff and I both doing Reds podcast.
Like 3 a.m. there?
It must be. He's in the Philippines. He says he's just saying hi and let us know he's still kicking. Glad you checked in, JoJo. Man, I was wondering about you. Hopes the Reds can keep us all interested throughout the year and that Phil Castellini can keep his mouth shut. From your lips to God's ears, JoJo. Glad to hear from you, man. Glad you're doing well. Hope the Philippines are nice right now. Appreciate you checking in with us.
Phil keeping his trap shut. I think the odds are pretty astronomical on that.
You old white dude. Okay. What would be realistically take to be for the Castellinis to be forced to sell a team? Listen, something major and something bad. For context, Major League Baseball forced Marge Schott to sell the Reds, and you can Google what she said and what she did.
Nowhere near that. Yeah.
And they're nowhere near that. So we're not close to that.
But I also think, and the other thing, the other interesting part of this is, and not to be super morbid, but looking into the future, whenever Bob passes away and this is Phil's show. Cause like it's Phil's show with, Bob's, permission right now. But whenever it is Phil's show, does he look at this and say, I can make, $1.5 billion on a sale and then reposition myself with some other business? That's a possibility because team values, even the Reds, which, we love to poo-poo the idea of going to games and all this other stuff for different people. I mean, not us, we go to games, but there's so many people that love to say, let's stop watching them and they won't get any money. The revenue for this team is insane and the value of this team is insane. So there's a chance that happens. I don't know what chance that is because that's predicting the thoughts in the head of Phil Castellini, which we cannot do. But there is that chance in the future that he looks at this and he says, the money I can make on a sale can reposition us for something else. And then they sell it to whoever.
Here's another one for you, I think. Danny says, given all the things that went bad last year, is it really a stretch to think that maybe 50% of the expectations and some good health could happen and translate into 20 more wins? So that would put them at 82 wins.
So they'd be a 500
game above 500.
Yeah.
And in contention for the final wild card spot, which, I know all you guys that are still here and participating in this Aloha Live Friday edition of the show, you guys listen every day. You know that I have said all along that I felt like this team had just enough talent that if the ball bounces their way, they could stumble into contention for that final wild card spot. It's exactly. I mean, we would go right back to that thing. So 20 more wins puts them at 82. Yeah, there's an outside minuscule chance that could happen. I think 67 to 70 wins is more likely. Jeff has gone on record saying 75 is his number. And, if you want to go 7 more wins above that, a lot of things have to go the Reds' way. It could happen, but a lot of things have to really just kind of work out.
What was it Yogi Berra that had the quote? Who said the quote of you win 50 and you lose 50 and what you do with the other 60?
We do this every time. I can never remember who said it, but yeah.
I always forget this. I was talking about this with somebody the other day, but yeah, everybody wins 50 and everybody loses 50. It's what you do with the rest that's kind of up to you. And so to say that the Reds could go 31 and 31 in those 62 games, that's kind of interesting to think because, like we said, a lot has to go right. The 99 percentile for this team has to hit. And the 99 percentile it only happens 1% of the time. That's why they call it the 99 percentile. So with that being said, I think last year, especially when you're talking about the 3-22 start, is it safe to say that the 1 percentile or the 2 percentile hit whenever they did that bad during the start of the year? It's probably safe to say. Mm-hmm. Who knows? Maybe we're due.
Maybe we're due. Greg Hughes says 70 to 75 wins if everything goes right.
I still say, if everything goes right, I still think they can flirt with 500.
We haven't done a good job of talking about this next guy. And remind me, Jeff, we need to work this into a regular episode coming up. But you old white dude wants to know about Vladimir Gutierrez and where does he fall into the rotation bullpen when he's healthy? I mean, first of all, I'm not sure when we're going to see him.
Mm-hmm. I think best case scenario, we're talking like the 3rd week of August, maybe the 4th week of August. Like coming back from Tommy John, the fact that he had Tommy John in the middle of last year, not at the early part, but in the middle, like that would be the best case scenario. More likely, we're talking about a September return. And that is when the Reds really have to make a decision. Do we ramp him up to be a starter and get 4 starts out of him? Or do we bring him back in the bullpen and maybe get, 10, 11 appearances out of him? And then we can ramp him up in the offseason to be a starting pitcher or make a decision from there. I think if we see him at all this year, it's going to be out of the bullpen.
Yeah, I totally agree. I can't imagine a scenario where a guy coming off of injury like that, and let's say your timeline is spot on. Let's say it's September. You don't waste that time trying to stretch him out. You put him in very controlled, very definable situations. Vlad, you're going to go pitch an inning, and then you're not going to pitch again for 3 days. They can do those kind of things if he's pitching out of the bullpen. So for me, I would listen. I feel like they got it wrong when they brought Graham Ashcraft up at the end of last season. I feel like they got it wrong when they brought Connor Overton back at the end of last season. And that same logic holds true. Yes, they were ready for the offseason. And if you've got a pitcher that coming off of that kind of injury, and now we're in September and you want him to ramp it up for the major league level, I don't know at that point that I even fire him up. I tell him, we will see you in Goodyear in 2024. And make sure that you are 100%.
So let's take that a step further. We can tell because we can speculate and we can talk about his profile, and that's probably what we're going to do on an episode next week at some point. But we can speculate what his future looks like. The Reds will tell us what they think his future looks like if they bring him back for September and pitch him out of the bullpen. Because if they do that, that's probably what his future is moving forward. Because you're right. I can't see them bringing him back for 10 or 11 appearances out of the bullpen just to have him go back to trying starting pitching next year.
Let's take one more, Jeff, and then probably put a pin in this.
It's been a great show. You guys have been great. Thank you so much for your
25-minute mark. I love that you all are sticking around. You guys, I know I say it every week. This is my favorite thing to do with the Locked On Red show is these live shows with you guys asking questions and participating. I love it so much. I'm trying to find us a good one to kind of wrap up on. And I saw a good Jonathan India question and I can't find it.
And this too, while you're looking for it, this too is going to evolve a little bit once the season begins. Because we won't necessarily have an Aloha Friday every Friday. We're going to kind of pick a game of the week and then do a live pregame show. So before the game gets going on, we'll have a live pregame show on the YouTube channel right here. Aloha Friday will evolve into the Aloha pregame show, but as once the offseason returns later on next year, which hopefully that's a long way away because I can't wait for baseball. But then Aloha Friday will return. This is something we will do through spring training. Then once the regular season starts, it'll become the Aloha pregame show, which Steve and I really haven't conferred on that, but I think that that's a good name.
Works for me. Let's do a comment and a question. John Park with a comment says he appreciates us doing this show. Says we do a great job. It allows everyone a means to bounce ideas, even though some of us live in Hawaii. You guys come visit me. Listen, if y'all are ever in Hawaii, hit me up on Twitter. If you're on the Big Island, I'll take you on a little tour. We'll go grab a Kona brew. We'll do something. I am always out and about, and I love doing stuff like that. So if you're ever here, let me know. And then
if you're ever in Hawaii, don't tell me because I'll be super jealous.
Well, you're supposed to come and visit. You know what? I'm going to just stop trying to ask you. I'm calling Hanakar. That's what I'm going to do. I think I want to finish giving Jeff an opportunity to do a little tease, and I'm trying to scroll back to it, and I can't find it. But basically, we'll just do like this. I won't put it up on the screen, Jeff, but I read it, and we'll just go with it. The question is this: does Jonathan India being thrust into a leadership role help him or hurt him heading into the rest of his career? And I know that our Monday episode is going to focus a lot on Jonathan India. So if you want to tease a little bit about what you're thinking, and then we can just kind of wrap up from there.
There's two things I'm thinking here, because the first thing that I think about this is I think it helps him. I think it helps Jonathan India's career immensely. Yes, he's a third-year player, but he has the right mentality for this. He has the right makeup for this. Number two, I don't think he was thrust into it. I think he showed up and he says, I'm the guy. And that is what has me so fired up for it, because there are so many things that he said in this article with Charlie Goldsmith. And if you have an Inquirer subscription, I encourage you to go read it, but we are definitely going to dive into it on Monday, because the things that he said are things that are making me want to take that 80 plus wins over on FanDuel, because they're absolutely beautiful. And it's going to be a fun episode breaking down the excitement that Jonathan India is talking about here in spring training.
Tune in Monday. Jeff has a lot more to say. I've seen a little bit of the preview of that, and it's going to be a fun show. And I think that at the hour and a half mark is where we are going to wrap up this live Aloha Friday edition of Locked On Reds. We're going to wrap it up right there. Don't forget, coming up Monday, we're talking Jonathan India. So if you haven't clicked subscribe yet, do it right now before you log off. Now that you have made Locked On Reds your first listen, go make your second listen, the Locked On MLB Prospects podcast with Lindsey Crosby. Lindsey does a great job. He is a prospect encyclopedia, and he will tell you all about Major League Baseball's stars of tomorrow today. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts, just like Locked On Reds. All right, Jeff, another week in the books. Spring training on Monday is fully underway. Position players are there. The pitchers are there. Games are coming by the end of February. What can everybody expect from me and you the rest of the way?
They can expect us to be locked in on all of the position battles, locked in on all of the guys in the best shape of their lives. And they can expect us to be locked on Reds every single day.